Thanks everybody for joining today. This is Ryan Saylor with the team over at Beyond Pricing. And really today we'll be covering what we're calling the Road to Recovery as part of the VRM Intel Live online conference. So I'm going to take us through a couple things today. But like I said, my name is Ryan Saylor. I'm a revenue manager with Beyond Pricing, so on the revenue management team, working on obviously our product, working directly with property managers, and really in regards to coronavirus, we've been taking a look at impacts to markets. We started looking at that earlier in January, so been working on quite a few things and want to share what we've been taking a look at with all of you today. So that being said, fairly quick agenda for today, really covering two main points here. The first one being really what we're calling our coronavirus indicator roadmap. So the data and metrics that we're looking at a market level and then also at a more local level for key markets around the world, indicating when we might see a shift or sort of a rebound when travel demand does come back. So we want to share that with you. Number one, just some data updates with what we're seeing here today. And then also things that we'll be looking out for moving forward that we're not seeing quite yet, that you can also look at either within your own market or even within your own data that you're seeing for your properties. And then I want to flip to talking about revenue management and kind of what we're calling the new normal. We know we're not going to go back to markets that we were seeing even last summer, or really what we were seeing before coronavirus really hit here in the US. So I want to go over really best practices on the revenue management side of things, a little bit of what you can do right now to prepare, and ideally what will help out on the revenue management side of things to stay competitive once we do see travelers start to return to markets across the world. So we'll cover all that and then save some time at the end for any questions from the attendees today, and then wrap things up here. So starting with that roadmap to recovery and really the key indicators that we're looking at. Like I said, at Beyond Pricing, we really started to see initially quite a few of our Asian markets be impacted by coronavirus related travel discrepancies earlier in January. So we noticed that going on. Obviously, the shelter in place or stay at home orders really kind of started in early February for places like China, Japan, and even impacting Australia and New Zealand as well. So that's where we initially started looking at things, especially with immediately what was causing impacts in certain markets, and then over time, really how markets have evolved, and then what we're seeing, as markets start to rebound for some of those earlier hit markets. As we all know, the kind of wave of coronavirus then really hit Europe hard, and then finally headed over here to the US and hit these markets. So we've built out really some of the data points that are the best indicators for assessing what's going on, assessing the initial impact, and then really pointing out how certain markets are recovering. So if you haven't already been to our coronavirus support page, we're surfacing a lot of that data that we're looking at right there. So you can plug in your own market. You can take a look at markets like over in Europe, Australia, even some markets in Asia as well. So we really wanted to just get this out there and show what we're looking at. There are so many tools out there right now to take a look at specifically how coronavirus is having an impact. So we just surfaced the main points that we're looking at to basically monitor what's going on and help everybody make some informed decisions moving forward. So quite a few things that we have on here, but really just these three graphs are kind of a starting point for assessing initial market impact. So really starting with cancellations, we wanted to take a look at cancellations by cancel date. So when people actually made those cancellations. And as we all know, in the United States, we saw really a kind of a week-long period for most markets where reservations just flooded in. I know property managers were dealing with that initially and are still dealing with quite a few cancellations. But there was, for most markets, pretty much a week-long wave right when shelter-in-place orders started, right in the media when things started to pick up quite a bit more, and travel uncertainty definitely grew. So we monitored that. Initially, we thought it was really just that first weekend where we were going to see cancellations, but it did end up being about a week for the entire country, and then by market just kind of varied. So definitely assessing that impact just immediately shows, how confident or not confident people were in making their reservations that were already booked. And then alongside that cancellation data, by cancel date, we also started to look at just by check-in date. So how far out people were being uncertain. And really the good news there that we all know now is people weren't really canceling, past the middle of May. So you can see down there on that percent of reservations canceled by check-in date, really that wave was still pretty short-term over the next, 30 to 60 days. Some urban markets were hit, quite a bit harder, and I'll go into some data here in a minute that will show that as well. But on this example, you can see Chicago has quite a few above average cancellations extending even into early summer. So we looked at that just to see when people were canceling. A lot of this is directly related to shelter in place restrictions, either by where people are locally or in specific destination markets. And that's kind of all the cancellation data that we were taking a look at initially to gauge impact. And then also obviously looking at basically there's booking pace by market and that reservations by book date chart here, really to see the massive decrease in people booking. Obviously that's going to be a pretty good indicator of when we see the uptick there, hopefully here pretty soon, once people start getting more confident in making new bookings farther out. So just some initial data points that we were surfacing and keeping an eye on that you can check on as well. So digging into some of those key metrics that we were taking a look at, and then also a few additional data points here, really looking kind of at a global scale helps point out how coronavirus has impacted markets on a different timeline. So initially looking at our China data here, you can see that yellow line, mid to late January and pretty much all of February. That cancellation wave, really came into to China. Then you can also see a little bit of an early impact in both Italy and Spain, some of the hardest hit European countries, again, starting with those cancellations a little bit earlier. And then we've highlighted the US a little bit bolder here, just to kind of show where things are currently. Again, a little bit of a suppressed wave here in terms of cancellations, but kind of mimicking what other countries saw, just pretty much at the latest stage of the game. Now, digging into that US cancellation data, here we broke down some classic, destination drive-to markets and then two urban markets, Austin and Chicago. So you can clearly see those two urban markets, Austin and Chicago. Same thing here, the cancellations extending a little bit farther out. And again, really that initial wave of cancellations hit urban markets really the hardest here. So we did see a little bit late stage cancellation wave come into some drive-to markets. Again, this really started to depend on local regulations, local level restrictions with what individual markets saw. But we started to break it down and take a look at, okay, really by area now, what's going on, what are we seeing in the changes here, and how we can keep an eye on this moving forward. So here's an interesting chart that we want to take a look at to illustrate between March 14th and April 5th, really what happened as far as cancellations go. So again, you can see kind of beforehand on that dotted line where a lot of markets were sitting. Already by March 14th, the Austin market was seeing a pretty big increase in cancellations, but places like Alabama Gulf Coast, Florida Panhandle, Hilton Head really hadn't seen anything yet. So it really took the second half of March for a lot of those cancellations to develop for these markets. Again, in relation to just people kind of learning that they ultimately were not going to make those reservations here in the short term through about mid-May. And here we're kind of switching to booking pace data. One of the interesting things to note here, and something that you can keep an eye out for your own market, even moving forward, is really when that booking pace started to slow. So same thing here, kind of segmenting out those urban destinations like Austin and Chicago. By mid-March, they were pretty much really hitting a slow point compared to average for booking pace. But places like Florida Panhandle, Hilton Head, Texas Gulf Coast, and even Alabama Gulf Coast really didn't see that booking pace slow until that middle week of March. So those urban markets were hit, likely just due to travel perception being in a more dense, compact area, urban area, causing people to really slow down bookings there. And now we've pretty much seen booking pace slow across the board. So this will be an initial indicator of, again, travel consumer confidence returning that we're keeping an eye on moving forward to be able to price accurately in markets and kind of gauge what this new normal is going to look like. One thing that we wanted to highlight and point out here, especially in the short term, is really how people are dealing with discounting their inventory in the short term in regards to just the lack of demand and increase in cancellations. So we split out some data here based on booked ADRs, so actually booked reservations and what people are actually confident in booking here in the short term. So you can see, again, cities on that red line, some of the most heavily discounted booked ADRs here in the short term compared to average, pretty much dropping ADRs about 50% through the end of May. A lot of the data that we're looking at here can be basically read into as more longer term stays coming into these markets and property managers being more willing to aggressively discount on some long-term stays just to get some revenue in here for the short term. You can see the same thing really in interior areas and also on the East Coast. And then for the US total, pretty much on average with what we were seeing in major cities. What you can notice for kind of the East Coast, but mostly interior and more drive-to destinations, is going to be really those discounts not pushing out until mid to late April. And then by the time, May kind of came around, everybody noticed that, in between what we were seeing for discounts here in the short term, everybody, has kind of caught on to that for what May is looking like right now. So this is key on the pricing side of things too, to see actually what ADRs people are looking at. But it's also important to look at just advertised pricing out there. So we are keeping an eye on that to see really how people are changing rates across the board here. But we haven't seen a lot of changes in advertised pricing for the summer quite yet. So really starting in June and then moving forward through 2020, we haven't really seen any major shifts in market price, just again, because there's quite a bit of uncertainty as to when travel demand may return here for most markets in the US. And here's something surfaced a little bit more global, but we did include US cities here just to kind of point out what we're seeing. But the decrease in booking lead time has been huge across the board. People are really, really uncertain as to when they'll be able to, complete a booking. So for most US cities, we've seen booking lead time drop to just a handful of days compared to some of these that are, 15, 20, even 30 days ahead of time for that booking lead time. So this, to be honest with you, is probably going to be the best indicator and the first indicator of individual markets kind of rebounding after all of this. Because as people get more confident in booking farther out for any given market, that will be good for us to really gauge perception of being able to travel and when people are actually going to want to travel. So we are taking a look at this really market by market to see when we're going to see that rebound start to happen. And really what we're expecting right now based on what we've seen really over the past couple months is not any sort of massive pent-up demand wave coming into most of these markets. We're going to see demand likely slowly return. So if you can imagine how we kind of got to this point, it did take a couple of weeks, slowly shelter-in-place restrictions are put, and slowly they're extended kind of by market. I know some classic vacation rental markets have seen local restrictions come into play here. So really all of that slowly happening is going to happen on the upswing as well. So we'll slowly start to see this come back, but it's not going to be, flip of a switch, everything back to normal. So looking at booking lead time is going to be a key indicator to see which markets are kind of first on that upswing. Globally, we're looking at the same data. Again, everybody's been decreased quite a bit here. Some cities that still have a longer lead time, still seeing like some anomalies here, like Madrid and a little bit of Paris as well. Still quite a bit down from what they were typically seeing on average before kind of that mid-March period. Alongside booking lead time, we're also taking a look at average length of stay. This is great for property managers to look at too. Obviously, you can directly know and see when people are actually booking in the short term here and then even a little bit farther out. But pretty much same thing, every single city in the United States and globally as well has seen quite a dramatic increase in average length of stay. For the most part in the short term, this is really all going to be driven by coronavirus demand. So we're really not seeing anybody travel very leisurely right now. Quite a few people are still on shelter-in-place restrictions or can't travel very far. So a lot of this has been short-term pickup for people wanting remote workspaces, people looking to shelter in place in a vacation rental in some of these cities, and people looking for, kind of short-term or bookings here in the short term for a longer period of time. So again, as this starts to decrease and kind of return back to normal for individual markets, that's when we'll see, that rebound start to happen, which is what we've kind of been looking for. So we're taking a look at quite a few data points really by market to gauge what's going on. And a lot of these are applicable directly to property managers looking at your own bookings or looking at market level data. Again, a lot of this data is being surfaced by so many different outlets in the industry. So there's a ton of good public data out there for you to use. We've got a ton on our coronavirus page, and then actually within our Beyond Pricing tool, looking at different market data metrics. But just make sure somehow you're keeping an eye on what your market is doing. You'll obviously know your own portfolio and what's going on there, but really changes in the market are going to be so important to keep an eye on moving forward to understand when demand is actually returning, and then even past that point, how your strategy should evolve. Again, we're not really going back to same old here. People are going to travel differently. People are going to stay differently. And people are going to be likely slowly returning to travel to very competitive vacation rental markets. So keeping an eye on all this data is very important. We're surfacing, certain key events that we're seeing. So, Asian markets rebounding or booking pace increasing there. Hopefully Europe is kind of on the upswing here pretty soon. And then for the US as well, we'll definitely be sharing what we're seeing in the data. But you'll also know at a market level key indicators that you'll be able to notice and kind of also pair that with locally what's going on with restrictions. Really, we've seen kind of patchy regulations across the board here. Obviously, we really haven't had any national orders in the US when it comes to shelter in place or restrictions on major travel yet. So paying attention to what's going on at a local level will help understand what's going on within your market. And then also take a look at your biggest feeder market. So if most of your travelers come from Atlanta or Seattle, take a look at what's going on there. Has the shelter in place been extended? Are people traveling? Take a look at all that and you'll be able to maybe get ahead of the game when it comes to handling that demand as it returns. So some more key takeaways. Really, these dynamics are going to vary by region. The United States was pretty late to feel the effects of travel demand slowing. We all know that the US was pretty much the last hit. So being able to see what's going on in Asia now, or even Europe on kind of an upswing there, can help us predict, what's going to go on in the United States over the next few weeks. Major cities were really hit the hardest. We saw a ton of cancellations, upwards of 80–90% for most US cities in that initial cancellation window, and quite a few of those cancellations coming in for later into the summer as well. Local governments are total wildcards here. I know some of you are already dealing with bans on vacation rentals and not bans on hotels. So locally, there's a lot going on. At state levels, there's quite a bit going on. So a lot of this is having an impact on demand. And whenever you're reading any of these data points, always take that into account. Booking lead time, might increase, but will it only increase as those restrictions are slowly removed? That's where you'll have to kind of marry the data points with what's actually going on kind of in the news and in the media. As far as cancellations, Europe was hit similarly as hard a few weeks before the US, pretty much about 10 to 14 days before what we saw exactly happen here in the US. And for Italy and Spain, some of the hardest hit countries, those cancellations have extended into late July, so getting into late summer. So we are, prepping for that in the United States, just because, what we know had happened in Europe so far. Hopefully that doesn't, but again, it will likely really depend on when shelter in place restrictions are either removed or extended further into, May or even June. So also new reservations have pretty much been muted for Europe and the United States. A lot of new reservations here in the short term are mostly driven by coronavirus demands. Again, people looking for remote workspaces, people looking to quarantine or shelter in place for a long period of time, people traveling for work due to coronavirus. Things like that are really all that we're seeing come in here still in the short term. Again, pretty much now until end of May, we are looking at that ADR, the booked ADR decrease. So obviously important here, just kind of reacting to the shock of cancellations and booking pace pretty much coming to a halt. But obviously the industry needs to focus on sustainability when it comes to ADR and really how that's going to look during that recovery period. And we'll get into that here in the revenue management portion, but keeping an eye on what people are actually booking in your market in terms of ADRs compared to what's being pushed out there as far as advertised pricing will be key as we get into that initial recovery period. All right, so now that we've taken a look at some of those key indicators and what we're looking at, really what we'll want to do is marry that with our forward-looking strategy. So now is obviously a time for most property managers where things are slow. You're dealing with cancellations over the past couple weeks. Ideally, those have slowed for most markets, although there's still quite a bit of uncertainty from the traveler's perspective. So really, what can we do now to plan for the competitive landscape that will emerge after all of this in quite a few markets? So we're calling that the new normal. Really, there's quite a bit under the revenue management umbrella that should naturally evolve due to coronavirus and just over time. So I want to make sure we cover quite a bit here that will help property managers stay competitive moving forward, even post coronavirus impact. And really, I want to start with a more high-level look at what revenue management is. I think really over the past couple months, past couple years, revenue management and the idea of revenue management has been talked about quite a bit in the industry. At Beyond Pricing, I know we've spent the past 4, 5, 6 years, educating the industry on dynamic pricing alone. So it's a very natural step for curiosity in the industry to, start to revolve around revenue management. And I'm not here to, define revenue management for the vacation rental industry, but I really, really enjoy carrying on the conversation, hearing from property managers, hearing from vendors and software providers on where the industry is heading, because there is so much opportunity, even if we look back and compare to the hotel and airline industry. So really, I want to work us towards the definition here. VRM Intel has the Data and Revenue Management Conference now, which is a great forum to talk about this kind of stuff and really get the industry up to speed to stay competitive moving forward. So I want to break it down today into 3 kind of main categories, starting with dynamic pricing and how important and integral that is to any really property management strategy. But also dig into channel management, inventory management. How are you distributing your inventory? A lot of that will belly up into the revenue management umbrella, and it's equally as important as your pricing strategy. The final piece here is a little bit vague by design, but just kind of calling it digital strategy. So how are you looking on channels? What's your marketing strategy? How are guests perceiving your inventory or your pricing and channel management strategy? So I want to dig into that, and that's where we'll kind of look at, okay, in this new normal, what can you do to stay competitive? So looking at just pricing, really over the past couple months, I've seen in the industry, just talking with people, a little bit of confusion between dynamic pricing and revenue management. So I want to point out that they're not one and the same. Dynamic pricing is typically a part of revenue management, but your revenue management strategy is a much bigger picture than just dynamic pricing. Your pricing strategy is very, very important. It's typically a great starting point for developing any sort of revenue management strategy for your portfolio, but they're not the same. If you only are using a dynamic pricing tool and have a pricing strategy in place, that's not necessarily your overall revenue management strategy. So I want to call that out so that we can individually focus on pricing and then the bigger revenue management picture, and move forward talking about that, because there is so much more that goes into revenue management that ultimately will help you optimize your revenue. In terms of revenue management overall, technology plays a huge part, as we all know. And really, the idea of technology specifically for hospitality or vacation rental revenue management is to really give property managers and owners a more advanced and a more efficient strategy. So for example, pricing. If I was going to do my own manual pricing, it's not really going to be that advanced, or if it is advanced, it's going to take a lot of work, so it's not going to be efficient. So the idea of a dynamic pricing tool kind of gives you that more advanced strategy in a more efficient way, allowing you or your management group to actually spend more time elsewhere. So the idea of technology and revenue management is to solve a lot of those problems. And it's really just to get everything up to speed with where most inventory is sold right now, which is online or through digital platforms. So that's huge. And, really I want to be cautious in saying this now because I know, a lot of property managers are in no position right now to take on new technology or software costs. Obviously, now is a great time to onboard and get all that work set aside and done while things are relatively slow. But obviously, quite a few property managers aren't going to be in that position. So now is a great time to go through technology that you're already using. If you're already using a PMS and a dynamic pricing tool, go through and do more training. Figure out creating an audit for your system. Go through all that now because taking the time now to learn it or get more involved or optimize it will only help you down the road. So there is opportunity outside of just signing up for more software or adding more technology to your tech stack here. And I want to wrap up Revenue Management 101 here with just a piece of advice on strategic ownership of your revenue management strategy. I talk to property managers every single week, and early on, I kind of hear or kind of ask the question, who right now is in charge of your pricing? Who right now is in charge of adding inventory to Airbnb or to your PMS? And people often don't have a solid answer on who that person is. And you want to make sure whoever's in charge of pricing is either also in charge of inventory management or talking to somebody who is in charge of that. Because this is going to allow your revenue management strategy to be a lot more central within your organization. And that's going to give you the power to be more proactive instead of reactive moving forward, which right now more than ever is more important, and also allow you to be a lot more agile. So developing a revenue management strategy is kind of a lot all at once. It's a lot of moving pieces. So having someone, whether that's yourself or someone on your team, it doesn't have to, you don't need a revenue manager title in your organization, but as long as someone's owning all that, define that now because it'll help you down the road. There's a lot of work to be done today, most likely, but even down the road, in the next year, there's going to be a lot more technology in the space. There's going to be a lot more tools, a lot more strategies coming about. So someone to be able to stay on top of that for you and on behalf of your entire portfolio is incredibly important moving forward. So quick and easy win there to basically assign someone to your revenue management strategy, especially the tasks that I'll kind of go over here in a minute. So I want to start with really dynamic pricing tools, and then just kind of start there when breaking down really what we're looking at on the revenue management side of things. I think right now, if you're not sold on the idea of dynamic pricing, it's more important now than ever. Really, dynamic pricing is integral to your revenue management strategy. And as I said before, it's kind of the starting point for a lot of strategies. And the idea there is just as markets evolve, your prices will need to as well. We all know you can't have the same prices you had 10 years ago, or you can't, just assume 5%, 10% growth every single year, because things like coronavirus could happen. No one saw this coming. We all need to react. What's the easiest and most efficient way to do that? Most likely a dynamic pricing tool. So obviously, more so now than ever, we're seeing massive shifts in markets. Definitely, that's not normal for most of the vacation rental industry. So keeping an eye on that is very, very important. But even in a normal situation or a more normal world, supply is always changing. Demand is always changing, especially at a local level. So dynamic pricing comes into play there to, again, just give you that more proactive and efficient strategy. I also want to talk about lowering prices here. No matter if you're using a dynamic pricing tool or pricing on your own or within your PMS, lower prices strategically. And really, especially now, avoid undisciplined discounting. A lot of people here in the short term have said, I know travel demand is down. I need to cut prices in half or 60%, 70%. That's great. You know that demand is down. You're keeping an eye on the news. But is that, decrease in price based on actual data points? Whether or not you're using dynamic pricing, always read the data and make informed decisions that way. Because especially now in a relative crisis, quite a few people in most markets are just going to want to absolutely tank rate. And looking to the vacation rental industry or even the hotel and airline industry, we all know after 9/11, after SARS, a lot of people were quick to just drop rates, drop ADR. Most markets enter a price war. And you can get occupancy back fairly quickly as a market, within a matter of weeks or even months back to normal levels. What won't come back quickly is ADR. So if you're dropping pricing without looking at what's going on in your market, what your competitors are putting out there, ultimately you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Kind of alongside that, don't look to gain competitive advantage by lowering your prices. If your only game plan coming out of coronavirus is to lower your prices, that's not going to give you competitive advantage because it's really, really easy for your competitors to do exactly the same and beat you quickly on price. So yes, obviously you're going to need to lower prices. People are expecting lower prices for general travel right now, but make sure that's coupled with something else you're doing. And I'll go over a little bit of what that might look like. But it could be, marketing. It could be on specific channels. It could be a number of things. So just don't think that reducing your price is going to give you the utmost competitive advantage, because most of you are going to be entering markets that are going to be incredibly competitive for those people, for travelers, as people start to book. So that being said, having dynamic pricing and having a developed and advanced strategy is not going to be enough moving forward. Truly, staying competitive on price is great and you need to, but if you want to be incredibly competitive in your markets and have a very developed strategy and maximize your revenue, you're going to have to do more alongside that pricing strategy. So that being said, I want to cover channel management and really what things look like now, what things could look like down the road. And a lot of what I'm defining here on the revenue management side of things, yes, is more important now than ever before with coronavirus, but this was always the direction that the vacation rental industry needed to head into, just to get more advanced, just to get on par with what hotels and airlines are doing, to really mature the space. So channel management is huge, second to pricing for sure, but how you're distributing and how you're selling actual inventory is incredibly important. And a lot of people are already doing this, but calling this out under the revenue management umbrella helps to bring this and tie this more to marketing and pricing and everything that encompasses your revenue management strategy. So looking at channel management, the idea here, especially right now and over the next couple months, is to increase your potential booking audience. Like I said earlier, we're not really expecting a flip of a switch for all these markets to turn on and you're going to see a flood of bookings come in for the summer or whatever rebound date we're looking at. It's going to be relatively slow. Demand will start to uptick. You'll see bookings. People get more confident, but it's not going to be an overnight sensation of pent-up demand returning to markets. So, the first day that you see booking pace for your market increase, that's still going to be a relatively small audience that you're going to need to compete for. So, as an example, let's say we're experiencing 50 people that want to start booking in your market. 25 of them are going to be loyal to Airbnb. So if you're not selling on Airbnb, your audience is only now 25 people. And that's not a push for an Airbnb, that's a push for more channels in general, because people travel and people book travel differently across the board. And giving yourself a more diverse strategy on your channel management side of things will increase the chances of just getting booked, which I think is, ideally what everybody wants right now or over the next couple of weeks. So increasing that audience is going to be key. And you can do that by expanding the channels that you're selling on or optimizing the channels that you're already selling on further. Always want to warn of distribution costs here. Always factor it in. No channel is created equal. We all know that OTAs are expensive to sell on. Who's paying for that? Where are the commissions being levied? Obviously take that into account. And the easiest way to do that is just to get an idea on net rates by channel. If you know you're selling this beachside condo for $100 a night, well, that's actually $85 a night on Airbnb and $97 a night on my website if I sell it on there. So if you factor in those distribution costs, it can give you a better idea, especially if your pricing is the same across different channels. Now, if you're able to kind of build in that cost of distribution into the rate, absolutely go for it. I know some systems can, increase your rate automatically when selling to the OTAs to kind of cover that cost. That's great. Just make sure that you realize that's a more advanced strategy, and you'll need to keep a closer eye on pricing changes. Again, here, the use of technology is very, very key. This is not an easy thing to do. I know everybody knows it's not easy to just add more channels or onboard a channel manager, but using technology can get you in the right direction of working smarter, not harder. And especially now, again, we want to do this in response to low demand due to coronavirus, but we want to make sure that this is a sustainable practice once things go back to relatively normal. We want to make sure that you're able to do all of this when things start to pick back up and demand starts to come back in. So using technology again here, things like a channel manager, things like your PMS just attending can really, really help you out and make this less of a daunting task. Again, here still, if you're not in a place to all of a sudden onboard a new channel manager, look at what you're already using. Maybe your PMS offers this. Maybe there's something else you could use or some other system you could set up. There are ways to use and optimize technology that you're already using if you're not in a place to onboard any new technology. So channel management in general is huge. It has been huge. I know anybody who's selling vacation rental properties right now has experience in channel management. So I want to make sure that this is talked about equally as pricing. Obviously, everyone wants to talk about the dynamic pricing. The past 1 to 2 years, it's definitely been a hot topic, but channel management and where you're selling is equally as important because that's what people are truly seeing. If you're developing a really great pricing strategy and pushing it out to a lackluster channel that's not optimized, well, then all the work you're putting into your pricing strategy is pretty much thrown out the window. So make sure you focus on this. This is something that, whoever you're assigning to revenue management strategy on your team, whether that's you or someone else, they need to be really, really integral to the channel management piece of your business. So wrapping up here a little bit with digital strategy. Again, I kind of start off by saying this is pretty vague by design. It encompasses quite a bit here. And really, it's just your digital presence. So it encompasses marketing, but it also encompasses, the text content on your website or your VRBL listing. One of the easiest ways to kind of go about assessing what your current strategy looks like and what you could do moving forward is just go through the guest booking process. See what it takes for someone to actually book any given property. That's an easy way to audit for quick win errors and optimize, your holistic strategy here. I'll throw out an example that I saw, I think some point last year, a couple months back. I was looking to, just check out a large property manager on, a drive to lake destination market, and they had a direct website. So I went directly there. And I went to go and just book and see what it looked like to just book one of their homes. So I went to their homepage. I was able to put in my dates, number of guests. I checked that I wanted a hot tub, and then I hit search. So I got a search results page of all of their properties, 50 or so properties that were available for those dates with my parameters. And it looked great. Beautiful pictures of homes, great content, reviews were on there. But as I scrolled through all these homes, I noticed one key thing was missing, and that was price. I got a search results page with no pricing, and I'd already put in dates, I'd already put in number of guests, and I wasn't getting any sort of ADR or even total cost of the reservation on that results page. So I was going to have to go into each individual listing to get that quote, where, obviously people book a property for a number of different reasons, but price is going to be pretty high up on that list. So surfacing that is very, very important. And so I started to click through a couple different ones, and they were all too expensive for my price point. And I ultimately thought, well, maybe this is all too expensive. And I couldn't sort by, lowest price, or I couldn't see what was on the lower end. So I ultimately didn't want to book. And so that property manager could have spent so much time developing their pricing strategy. They probably spent weeks, focusing on listings that weren't getting bookings and lowering price, but that wasn't being surfaced anywhere. That wasn't easily attainable by someone looking to book. So little things like that are so quick to catch, but obviously we sit and talk about vacation rentals and pricing and strategy and revenue management all day long, but guests are not. So you got to throw it in their face. You got to really communicate to them changes in your strategy and really what you're doing, because if you're putting all this work into any given strategy and then it's not, surfaced properly at the guest level when they're booking, then it's really all for nothing. So syncing up your marketing efforts as it relates to pricing, as it relates to channels, really is kind of the basis of that digital strategy idea. So a lot of that goes into marketing. Again, just communicating, hey, if I'm lowering pricing, do my guests see that? Do I have a specials and promotions page? Do I have a way to highlight on, Expedia that I'm running a promotion for the summer or something like that? Auditing those things from a guest perspective will really give you a great idea of what you're kind of looking at here. Same thing with listing optimization. I get a lot of questions from property managers that say, hey, like our pricing looks great, or this property is struggling, but we can't go any lower on price. What else is there? And that kind of bleeds into what we've been talking about in revenue management overall. But looking again at how your listings are specifically being shown either on a third-party channel or your website is key. So photos, text, content, making sure that's consistent and in parity across different channels. If you're selling on different channels is important, or even just cleaned up and consistent across your portfolio. Making sure that everything is laid out the same or using the same kind of wording and things like that. One thing here that works out pretty well is try out some tests, do some A/B testing on specific listings. It really can come down to, someone doesn't want to book a house because the featured photo is of the backyard and the picture of the kitchen we know can get more booking. Do some testing, change up photos, let it shop for a week or two and see what works best. That can really kind of help you play around with something other than pricing if the listing is struggling. So that all kind of bellies up into digital strategy and really what property managers should look for moving forward. That encompasses, that idea of revenue management. And all this sort of ties together and needs to talk to each other. So all these different strategies should be able to talk and communicate, and that's where you get optimized revenue. So even going back to earlier when I said lowering your price isn't going to give you any sort of competitive advantage in your market, or it's a pretty weak competitive advantage, because if I was your competitor, I'm just going to also lower my price and then we're going to get into a gnarly price war. Things like digital strategy and switching up things there, especially as demand starts to return as as the impact of coronavirus weakens, will be key in optimizing your revenue. So start focusing on this now. Set up some audits, go through everything, set up some processes to set yourself up for success moving forward. So some general final takeaways as we look to wrap up here. Going back to those indicators, just know what they are for your market and for your portfolio. You can take a look at all the market data that's out there. A lot of people are servicing insights and saying, this is the end date that we're seeing, or this is what we're seeing by market. Take that for what it is and, really dig into your specific market and how you'll be impacted. Look not only what's going on in your backyard, but look at what's going on in the backyards of where your guests live. So look at your feeder markets and see what's going on there. See when they're going to be even allowed to travel again. See who might have the, available income to even travel again. Look at those things just to give you a better idea of when things will start to pick up here. Travel demand is likely to slowly return. If you look at how we got to where we are today, it didn't happen overnight. It was pretty slow, and likely as we head into the downturn here, it's going to happen slowly too over the course of a couple weeks. We'll see cities start to release shelter-in-place restrictions, but restaurants only open up at 50% capacity. Things like that will slowly get people traveling again. And that initial audience of people traveling to your market is still going to be relatively small, and you'll need to compete for them until things fully ramp back up. Warning against lowering your prices, willy-nilly or undisciplined. Use that data to lower your pricing. If you're using a dynamic pricing tool, likely things are already changing automatically for you. So know what's going on there and know what options you also have, like customizations, last-minute discounts, things that you can do in the short term alongside, kind of that market level strategy that's coming from your dynamic pricing tool. Always use proper messaging and marketing when the time is right. So obviously right now, quite a few people are changing up their listing descriptions to highlight cleanliness or cleaning practices. Use that at the right time and just kind of gauge when that's actually going to be appropriate, and market similarly too. Pushing promotions when demand starts to return. Just gauge all of that when you actually know that your market is beginning to change. And then finally, use technology to really expand your reach and optimize your strategy. Things like channel managers, things like dynamic pricing tools, any sort of digital marketing tools, Google Ads, things like that. Use those to your advantage. And if you have any downtime right now, use this time to either add on new technology to what you're currently using, or get to know what you're already using a lot better. If you're already using a property management system and a dynamic pricing tool, and you don't have the means to add a channel manager right now, see what you can do within those tools that you already have. Optimize them, audit them, learn more about them, because even if it's not going to help you here in the short term, it's probably going to help you 2-3 months down the road when you know you can do X, Y, Z as things evolve. We know that markets are changing day by day at this point. We're seeing at high levels, there's really new news out there every single day. So stay in the loop with what's going on in your market in terms of data. Watch the news, read the news as it pertains to your market. Obviously, don't go crazy, but know what's going on, because as people watch the news and get more confirmation and affirmation that they can start to travel again, that's when you'll see bookings. So stay on top of that and keep an eye out. And in the meantime, focus on these points to actually develop your revenue management strategy. So that being said, I hope this was helpful. I know we'll kind of have copies of the stack here for everybody to review. We're surfacing quite a bit of data. You can play with your own market data right on our coronavirus support page. If anybody wants to dig through this or has any questions, I'm always happy to answer. And then also, moving into any questions that we have from the talk today, I'm happy to answer any of those now. So I think, Connie, are you on with any questions from today? Okay, so I think we've got a couple here. Okay, cool. So we've got one question: which indicators should I use to make educated decisions about my pricing strategy? So a lot of the indicators that I went over today were really designed around keeping an eye on when your market will start to rebound. In terms of your pricing strategy, looking to that booked ADR metric is going to be key. So what people are actually booking will be very, very important in terms of determining how people are willing to pay for different bookings. And that, coupled with forward-looking pricing in your market, is going to be important as well. So really, as people update their pricing strategies with a dynamic tool or just within their own PMS, that will be very, very important to keep an eye on moving forward. To really also see, even from a property manager or owner standpoint, how people are expecting things to change moving forward. So really looking at the pricing that's being pushed out there, and then also what travelers are booking, will be key in terms of changing up your own pricing strategy. And that's no different than usual too. It's just more important now with obviously coronavirus and the impacts that we're seeing from there as well. So I think we have another question here. What can I do to update my strategy if I'm already using a dynamic pricing tool? Great question. As I mentioned, a lot of the dynamic pricing tools, including Beyond Pricing, are making changes at a market level. So any sort of algorithm that you're using is reacting to changes in the market already, which is good. Speaking to Beyond Pricing, there are customizations available for you to add last-minute discounts here in the short term or rolling moving forward. You can also take a look at any sort of seasonal mins and maxes, overrides to your rate, things like that you can update specifically more so at your own portfolio level to make sure that your listing revenue is fully optimized across the board. So there are different things that you can do, mostly a little bit more manual, but just keep an eye out for, again, those same indicators and change up individual listings or your entire portfolio as needed. All right, so there's another one. Are there any markets outside of the US that are already seeing a rebound in travel demand? So like I said, we've been keeping an eye on really coronavirus impacts to markets ever since January, when we noticed for quite a few markets in Asia, things start to slow down here. So speaking to that data, there really isn't any quick wins or any major rebounds that we've seen. I know a lot of hotel data is being surfaced now, showing little by little increases kind of week by week in just overall occupancy. But again, it's nothing like a flip of a switch demand returning. It's a slow uptick getting back closer to historical year-over-year numbers. But really most markets that we're seeing in any sort of rebound phase, it's week to week looking at the previous week, right? So any forward-looking week that is just doing better than the past 7 days is a good sign. But no markets right now are fully rebounded from that initial wave of cancellations or booking pace slowing. And there are some caveats. I know there are property managers speaking to the US that have seen a rise in bookings, mostly in drive-to markets or more kind of remote locations as people look to kind of get away for the time being. So there is demand there. And then even in urban areas too, there is demand. here in the short term for people looking for places to shelter in place, people looking for remote workspaces. That's a good tip too. A lot of people I know in major cities have been highlighting, in their listing titles that this would be a great remote workspace, great Wi-Fi for, a studio or one bedroom for people to book. So it's all, still really related to coronavirus related travel. And really no markets have seen, a full rebound quite yet, but I think that's what we're all looking for. Cool. So I think that's everything that I'm seeing question-wise for today. So I'll go ahead and wrap things up here. But if anybody has further questions, feel free to get in contact with VRM Intel. They can pass them along to me. My email is just ryan@beyondpricing.com. So if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to help. And then also on our Beyond Pricing page, we have obviously our coronavirus support there for you as well. So any other questions you have, feel free to pass along to me. Hope this was helpful, and hope you all have a good rest of the day.